The Road to War. Written and narrated by John Miro. Get more at servingworlds.com. 7. Government Row, Southreach City. Department of Infrastructure, Rail Station, eastbound line. Shivering for more than the cold and dark, Frankie stood on the platform and stared at the open door on the waiting rail car. The bell chimed for a second time. A recorded voice warned her to stand clear of the doors. Instead, she bolted forward, turning sideways to slip inside just in time. As instructed, Frankie knelt on the first seat and watched the platform disappearing behind her. Nobody was following. Nobody she could see. She sat down and stared straight ahead, chest rising and falling, extremities twitching from the adrenaline rush. She pulled out her news screen, the one she had bought with cash in a downtown shop. She powered it on and tapped in the fake number she'd hacked into Gub's whitelist server and added herself. "What are you doing, Frankie?" she hissed. She thought of all the freedom her money and genius afforded her. Then she ran her teeth over the ugly rise of scar tissue on her upper lip. A souvenir from Officer Franzen. Her money and genius didn't matter unless she did something that mattered. Which is why she'd brought a green marker with her to a seedy nightclub out by the spaceport and scrawled the number for her screen on the bathroom wall of the third stall, just like the note on her anonymous messaging account had told her to do. The next message came with instructions to take the last train of the night out of the department, to wait until the last minute to board, and watch for anyone following her. Only then was she to turn on the screen. She ran her tongue over the scar on her lip again, then made a fist and told herself to stop. It was a nervous habit, and it was proving hard. She was a damn sight more than nervous. 18 months ago, she had been a married woman with no scar on her lip, a much sought-after machine intelligence designer and problem solver, until Franzen hit her over and over and left her there to die. Until Nate's shame for fleeing during her assault drove the final wedge into their rotting marriage. The train shuddered and slowed to a stop. The doors hissed open. The automated voice called the station, but she didn't hear it. Frankie stared at her screen. Her instructions were to get off the train only if and when she received instructions. The doors hissed shut, and the train continued on its way. Frankie looked past her phone at the elegant clothes she wore, another far cry from the entrepreneurial coder of old. The new Frankie, going by Olander again, Nate could keep his shitty last name, had sold her company and signed the shackles, edicts, non-disclosures, and contracts of Gov. Thrilled to have her, Governor Card created a floating position just for her, giving her access to virtually every public, private, and secret computer network pushing electrons on reach. There were still a few black systems. Because she was a certified genius and networks always broke, she'd get to those too eventually. She knew so much more than the stupid girl left to die for the sin of trying to please a worthless husband. The train stopped again. Someone walked on. Frankie ignored them, until a woman sat down right beside her. Frankie turned to look at her. The woman with the wavy brown hair smiled back. Frankie whipped her head back to the front. The woman patted her leg. Frankie looked down and saw a wedding ring on a brown-skinned hand, clear polish on short nails. "It's okay. We can talk." "Who are you?" Frankie asked, her voice quavering. "You can call me El. Just El. I know you were told to wait for a message, but it's better this way. It was time to meet, Frankie." "Are you going to hurt people?" Frankie blurted. The woman's smile faded. "We don't want to hurt anyone. But you know what's happening better than most. You're the one who showed us how bad it is." The hand patted her leg. "We have to speak for them. We have to fight for them. Frankie nodded. Leaking the truth had been her idea. She'd sought Elle's people out. She'd passed on the unredacted records and secret laws, the meeting notes detailing secret laws, cover-ups for corporate crimes, the disappearances and deaths. She'd cried, alone in her apartment, over the pictures and horrors and plans. Holding back tears, Frankie pulled a foil wrapper out of her pocket. Elle took it. There's a student protest planned for next week. Gov military are going to be there to pose as protesters, start a riot, and force maximize the police response. It'll be a slaughter, Elle breathed. Frankie nodded. She couldn't keep back the tears after all. Elle put a hand around her and squeezed her shoulder. Let it out now. You have to hide it every day you walk into that office. Let it out. Frankie's lips quivered, all except the thick lump of scar tissue. But she held the flood back a little longer. There's more, she gasped, turning to face Elle. There's a recycling plant near the equator, but it's full of... Oh, God, I think it's full of... The flood broke, and Elle held her, while Frankie let go. September 5th, 2347. Southreach City, North Side, Agriculture Sector 2. Samin was a chameleon. She could blend into any crowd. Her undercover squad had nicknamed her Ghost. Today, she was a student, carrying a meter-square screen, upon which scrolled, "Where are you taking them?" Her boss wanted someone on the scene, even though the higher-ups had told him to stand down. The idiot wanted to be the city's top cop, so he ignored the hands-off order, in the hopes of infiltrating the resistance, bringing in one of the names on the most wanted list, and making a public splash that he could ride for a promotion. She sneered at the line of police vehicles. The disdainful expression was not part of the disguise, but a part of her. Behind the line of signs like hers were old ladies, students, and a handful of men. Why the hell did the SRPD need riot control mechs for this? 4 of the 14-meter-tall mechanized battlesuits sat between 5 cars, blocking off access to the Superdome being constructed on the agriculture site behind them. Each mech was fitted with plastic screens to either side, which would allow officers to advance safely when the shooting started. After the last few protests, Samin knew there would be shooting, followed by a crushing response. She never talked to Lena about what she saw at the protests turned riots. Lena had stopped asking, too. Which sucked. She reached the end of the police barricade, turned around, and walked back. Some of the protesters carried speaker boards tuned to a public streaming station. The music choice indicated sympathy for the growing anti-gov movement. Samin wondered how long they'd be streaming for. The music cut off, replaced by a special news report announcing a riot in place at Agriculture Sector 2. The students and protesters looked around. It was almost cute how innocent they were, trying to figure out where the riot was. Samin dropped her sign and ran, but the suppression gas was already dropping onto the protesters' heads. She kept herself out from under the riot control mechs. Other protesters weren't so lucky. Heads and legs were crushed. A marching line of cops beat back anyone who tried to scurry out. She could have used the code word to get herself out. That was before one of the cops beat an old lady to the ground. She took him down instead. She spent 2 days in a holding cell with the dozen or so survivors. One of them was a woman named Elena. She introduced herself as Elle for short. Samin shook her hand over the head of a sleeping woman bleeding in Elle's lap. Elena told Samin about other sabotaged riots, other atrocities. Samin told Elena about mining deaths covered up by Gov. That was just to start. The conversation between the two women was long and hard and true. November 16th, 2347. Butler Plateau, former site of Butler Township Farming Co-op. His home was gone. Lee turned away from the half-completed dome rising from behind razor wire fence. He stared back at the foothills he could draw with his eyes closed. "Told you," grunted the driver of the truck who had given him a ride from town. He spat a thin ripple of spit and snot at the screen bolted to the fence. Ministry of Agriculture Superdome 6. No place safe from corporations and government no more. In prison, he dreamed of coming back to this exact spot, this exact view. In Maggie's last letter 3 months back, Lee had learned his brother Tom was dead. Shot dead, in the middle of the night, while defending the farm's main dome from thieves. 9 months in prison served. He came back to visit his brother's grave, to start his life again with her. His home, his life, it was all gone. Where did they take them? The farmers. Bodies, you mean? Probably left them under that dome. Why pay for burial if you won't pay a body when you steal their land? A patrol vehicle rolled around the corner and stopped between them and the fence. 2 armed soldiers jumped out. The truck driver backed away, hands up. "We were just leave." Lee stepped in their way. He didn't listen to their shouts, didn't care when their hands rested on firearms. He only cared about one thing. "Where's my wife?" he wailed. "Where's Maggie Zhang?" Something metal hit the side of his head. He went half blind, but screamed the question again. "Where's Maggie Zhang?" They beat him to the ground, only stopping when the truck driver leaned on his horn. They left him there with a last kick. The truck driver got him back in the truck's pressurized cab and taped up his cuts. Lee stared back at the half-constructed dome. The ache in his guts changed, hardened. His life was gone. They'd taken everything. Now it was Lee's turn to take, and he had nothing left to lose. You have been listening to Reach, The Road to War. Written and narrated by John Miro. Music, All This by Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com. Hear more of the story at servingworlds.com. Thank you for listening.